I'm Patrick Watson, and I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer, and you're watching a special presentation of Big Fat Astrovlog. Thank you very much for purchasing. So let's get right to it. This, of course, is about Zodiacal Releasing from the lots of Fortune and Spirit. So you probably already have some idea of this, but if you're brand new for some reason, what is Zodiacal Releasing? Well, it's a Time Lord system which is passed down to us by Hellenistic astrologer Vedius Valens. It divides a life up into chapters like a book. It's a bit like a Western Dasa system. It uses the tropical zodiac, and it uses whole sign houses, which is important. Even if you don't normally use whole sign houses in your practice, you will definitely have to use it for this technique. Basically, all it means is the sign that your ascendant falls in is your first house. So if you're an Aries ascendant, then the sign of Aries is your first house. The sign of Taurus is your second house. The sign of Gemini is your third house, and so on. It uses traditional rulerships, so that means Mars rules Scorpio, Jupiter rules Pisces, and Saturn rules Aquarius. There might be a role for all outer planets, but it isn't rulership. And the other curious thing about this technique, and there's a lot of weird stuff, honestly, about this technique. There's really no reason why this should work at all. But, the world is crazy. It uses 30-day months and 360-day years. So, yeah, just go with it for now. So, what is a lot? It's not a planet, right? It's the distance between 2 points or planets projected from the ascendant. So, these aren't actual physical points in space. They're derived from zodiacal arc between planets. And that's sort of similar to how houses are defined by their relationship to the ascendant. And it's kind of related to recurrence transits and phase angle returns due to being derived from the distance between two planets. So it's the distance itself that makes a lot significant. So, for example, if you have a Venus-Mars square, then squares for you will always be a bit Venus and Marsy. And the square from your ascendant would therefore have a Venus-Mars type quality. That's kind of how or why lots should work at all. So why don't we call it Arabic part? That's the other really popular name for lots. And there's a very basic reason for that, I think. The earliest lots we have come from Hellenistic astrology, not from Arabic astrology. Nothing against them. That's not where it comes from. The Greek word kleros more properly means lots that you cast, like dice or drawing straws, rather than part, which suggests portions or divisions. It sort of captures this idea of lots being cast out from the ascendant, kind of falling where they may. There's an element of chance or randomness to it. And the term Arabic part is inaccurate at best and euphemistic at worst. I'm sure, the Arabic astrologer Abu Mashar, doesn't want us talking about how big his Arabic part is. Okay, so what about the weirdly specific lot names? We have like the lot of lost animal, lot of the operations and orders and medical treatment, and the lot of unchastity by women. These are definitely not lots for 2017. Some lots have the same calculations, but they have different names, like the lots for sale, lands, landed property, and adultery. So, if you ever want to find a lot that, when you're selling a house or something, you want to look at the lots for selling your house, and you're also getting some strange on the side, you have one lot for it. One-stop shopping. And lot names are probably not to be taken at face value, but as a summary of the action performed between the two planets. So the primary lot, you should know, is the lot of fortune, also called the part of fortune. It is the primary lot. It's the archetypal lot. It's the lunar lot. It's the lot upon which all other lots are based. This is the mother lot. And it's calculated from the moon to the sun for night births and from the sun to the moon for day births. And fortune doesn't... Some people interpret fortune like they would a benefic, presuming that fortune means good fortune, but it more accurately represents circumstances, that which befalls us out of our control. And it's judged by its angularity to the ascendant, the condition of its ruler, whole sign aspects to malefics and benefics. It's becomes a kind of a new ascendant of sorts, and the signs relative to fortune take on significations of the natal houses. So, the 10th sign from fortune, from the sign of fortune, is considered the fortune 10th. It can sometimes take on the attributes of the 10th house. So when you're looking at fortune in your natal chart, what you're really seeing is a point in your chart that describes uh, where you are vulnerable, what your kind of your lot in life is in a sense. Now it's very general and it's kind of abstract, but you can get more specific information from it through this technique. The lot of spirit is the complementary lot to the lot of fortune. So while the lot of fortune has a concatenated moon as its symbol, the lot of spirit has a concatenated sun. So the lot of fortune is the lunar lot, while spirit is the solar lot. And you always find that it's parallel to fortune across the ascendant. And the lot of spirit has the exact same calculation as the moon, except it's flipped. So it's from the sun to the moon at night, and from the moon to the sun during the day. And it represents one's actions, that which we do within our control. So the lunar lot is passive, is that which befalls us. And the lot of spirit is active, that which we try to change or affect. And this too is judged by the condition of its ruler, angularity to fortune, relationship of ruler to fortune, wholesome relationships, benefics, and malefics. And again, that's all kind of general and kind of brushing over that, but you'll see why that it's more useful sort of later on rather than right now. So just to show you how simple it is basically to calculate these points. So in day charts, the nature of the lot is dictated by the planet it is projecting to. So, for example, you can see fortune. Fortune, well, it's already indicated here that it's in Cancer, but you could also take the sun and basically imagine that you're taking the distance between the sun and the moon and you're rotating it so that the sun is on the ascendant and it's projecting to the position of where the moon would be. So that ends up being an 8 Cancer. The sun at 26 Gemini is approximately, is almost a square away from the moon. So it's almost a square from the ascendant. And then same thing with spirit, approximately a square from, like, imagine that you take the sun moon arc and you're rotating it so that the moon is on the ascendant and the sun, falls out right there around 29 Sagittarius. So in day charts, it's all about the nature of the lot is dictated by the planets projecting to. Whereas in night charts, the nature of the lot is dictated by the planet it is projecting from. So imagine that you are taking the sun moon angle and you're moving the moon to the ascendant. That means that where the sun falls out is where fortune is. And then the opposite for spirit. So imagine you're putting the sun on the ascendant, and where the moon is falling out is that's where spirit is, because the nature of the lot is dictated by the planet is projecting from. So in day charts, it's to, and in night charts, it's from. Okay, so the relationship between fortune and spirit. Fortune and spirit are always parallel to each other across the horizon. So that means at new moons, fortune and spirit will be close together at the ascendant due to the short arc between the sun and the moon. At quarter moons, fortune and spirit will be at the zenith and nadir of the chart, opposing each other due to the square between the sun and the moon. And at full moons, fortune and spirit will always be close together at the descendant due to the long arc between the sun and the moon. Another kind of funny thing you can do with fortune and spirit is you can measure the eminence of a chart, which is essentially a measure of how supported a chart is in the sort of grand cosmic scheme of things, what esteem it has in the world, the potential of the chart to rise above its inherited station. And if this makes you feel a little bummed out, I guess it's hard to avoid. If you find out you don't have a very eminent chart. Basically, what this amounts to is the rulers of fortune, spirit, exaltation, and basis being in their own signs, or in each other's signs, or in the 10th sign from fortune. For example, having fortune in Aries, Mars in Capricorn, or fortune in Taurus and Venus in Aquarius, fortune in Gemini, Mercury in Pisces, fortune in Cancer, Moon in Aries, or fortune in Leo, Sun in Taurus, etc., etc. So this is you should take this image and you should just basically commit it to memory. These are the periods associated with the signs for this technique, and you'll need them again and again and again and again. And most of them are based on the planetary trends of some of those planets. For example, so the two Mars-ruled signs, Aries and Scorpio, Mars has a recurrence period of about 15 years, and so it gets 15 as its number. As its number, the two Venus-ruled signs, Taurus and Libra, they each get 8 years each. Uh, Venus has a very close recurrence period of about 8 years. Same thing with the Mercury signs. Gemini and Virgo both have 20 years. 19 for Leo, the Sun. The 19 is the Metonic cycle, and then the Moon has 25 years. Now, something kind of strange about Saturn is in Aquarius, in the Aquarius period gets 30 years, but the Capricorn period gets 27. And I think it has something to do with the fact that 30 and 27 together add up to the great year of Saturn or whatever. Yeah, it's a little strange that that Capricorn gets a slightly lesser time than Aquarius does. But in the case, these are the numbers you have to commit to memory. Um, they're just that important. Basically, the way Zodiacal Releasing works is, say you have fortune in Gemini. So that means for the first 20 years of your life, that means that the condition of the sign of Gemini and its ruler Mercury kind of tell you a bit about the nature of those 20 years. After those 20 years are up, the next 25 years would be ruled by Cancer. Um, so the condition of the moon and any planets in Cancer, that will kind of tell you what that period of time will be like. And then when that's done, you move on to 19. So it's very simple. So wherever a lot falls out in your chart, it's going to follow this pattern. It's going to start. So if you have, Fortune in Aquarius, and it'd be 30 years, then 12 years of Pisces, then 15 years of Aries, then 8 years of Taurus, going around the zodiac in the right order. So yeah, there's some weird stuff you just have to kind of roll with. We're using 360-day years, so that means a 19-year Leo period is actually 6,840 days, not 6,939 and 75.75 days. So that's a difference of 100 days. So the differences do add up. It gets really hard to calculate. That's why you really need a program like Delphic Oracle to calculate these periods, because doing it by hand sucks, and it's really annoying. Whew. Let's see. We're going to get back to the major periods and minor periods because that's kind of just a lot to take in all at once. Oh yeah, so one other final thing we should get to before we get to the some of the example charts I have. Cadent periods. So let's see. So how am I going to explain this? The lot of spirit can release through these signs as well, right? So say you have fortune in Cancer. So that means the signs angular to Cancer are obviously all of the cardinal signs. It's like Capricorn and Aries and Libra. So when, say you have spirit in Leo, so you have fortune in Cancer and spirit in Leo, that means spirit gets 19 years, and then it gets 20 years, and then it gets 8 years. Now, when it reaches that 8-year period of Libra, that's angular to the fortune in Cancer. So that shows you this is going to be a time when this person's actions have more impact in the world, or when they're more active in their careers. Whereas if they're in signs which are cadent to fortune, then they tend to have more dead ends. They tend to have more kind of detours. They're not necessarily doing the things they're always meant to do. Sometimes it can be a great time for preparing, or kind of getting training, or getting ready basically for the events of the angle. And then the signs which are succeedent to the sign of fortune tend to be like continuations of what happened at the angle. So I think we'll have some examples of that. So some interpretive principles for this technique. The ruler of the sign and its conditions show the motivations for acting. Planets in the sign show occasions for action. Planets in the whole sign aspects to the sign indicate other occasionally contributing motivations. And yeah, cadence signs relative to fortune are preparatory periods. Angular signs to fortune are times for action. And succeeding times relative to fortune refer back to the event of the angle. And major periods hinge on the encounter of its ruler and or the ruler of the lot. So we're going to see how this all turns out. Just a really basic one. So when a person encounters the Lord of the Lot of Spirit on the subperiods, they discover their life's work, or the most significant work of their life. For example, if someone was born with the Lot of Spirit in Aries, and they were born with Mars in Libra, then they encounter the Lord of the Lot of Spirit when they encounter Libra as a subperiod. So one example of this is with Barack Obama. He was born with the Lot of Spirit in Sagittarius, and the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter, which is in Aquarius. So he has his lot of fortune in Aries, and that means that when Sagittarius spent the first 12 years in Sagittarius, then 27 years in Capricorn, when it finally reached Jupiter in Aquarius, that was in January 13th, 2000, and that was when he first ran for a national office. And he actually lost in that first race in 2000. But it was also when he got in contact with the political operatives who would help him on his way to becoming senator of Illinois and later the presidency. So in a way, this was really the beginning of his career in national politics, including his presidency. So that all happened while on a major period he had encountered the Lord of the Lot. With this guy, with George W. Bush, he was born with the Lot of Fortune in Scorpio and the Lot of Spirit in Taurus. So he spent the first 8 years of his life in Taurus, then 20 in Gemini, then 25 in Cancer, and then, Leo contains Venus, the ruler of Lot of Spirit in Taurus. So it was in that time, which was shortly, which was in 1998. So this is right before he's already governor of Texas at that point, and this is right as he's about to embark on, his presidential campaign in 2000, which ultimately ended up working out in his favor, even though he totally didn't win that time. I haven't forgotten. With John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he was born with fortune in Capricorn, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Cancer. And so the moon rules his lot of spirit and that is in Virgo. And so his lot of spirit spent the first 25 years in Cancer, the next 19 in Leo, and then it finally got to the Lord of the Lot of Spirit in Virgo when right before he was elected president. So in October 10th, 1960, so that was just basically a month before he was elected, he reached this Lord of the Lot of Spirit. Franklin Roosevelt, he was born with the Lot of Fortune in Aries, and is born with a lot of Spirit in Aquarius. So the Lot of Spirit is ruled by Saturn, and he has Saturn in Taurus. So he spent 30 years in Aquarius, 12 years in Pisces, 15 years in Aries, and then he finally reached Taurus, which contains his Saturn. And that's actually reasons why he became president under the Aries period as opposed to the Taurus period. But notice that when he reached the Taurus major period, that was when he kind of switched gears from being the Depression era president to being the, basically transitioning from the New Deal president to the war president. And this is when he broke with tradition in, being elected a third time and even a fourth time. So yeah, kind of an interesting correlation there, especially in light of all these other presidential figures. Woodrow Wilson, he was born with the lot of fortune in Virgo and the lot of spirit in Scorpio. So a lot of spirit in Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which is in Aquarius. So when he reaches Aquarius, that's when we would expect him to kind of find his most important work. And so he spent the first 15 years in Scorpio, the next 12 in Sagittarius, the next 27 in Capricorn, and when he finally reaches Aquarius, that was in 1910. So that was right in the run up to his being elected in 1912 as president. So reaching the Lord of the Lots seemed to, hint at how he would get into this, the most important work of his life. Theodore Roosevelt, he was born with a lot of fortune in Libra, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Pisces. So a lot of spirit in Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and he has Jupiter in Gemini. So we'd expect when he reaches Gemini, that's going to be when things kind of go crazy for him. So he spent the first 12 years of his life in Pisces, the next 15 in Aries, the next 8 in Taurus, and then he reaches the Lord of the Lot of Spirit with Jupiter and Gemini. And that was in 1893. And this is where his career in national politics, this is when it happened. This is when he became, governor of, I believe, governor of New York. And, then he was picked to be vice president. And then he actually got to be president. And so that's when his career in national politics kind of all happened, was in this 20-year period. And yeah. So now I guess this is a good time now to explain what I meant by the subperiod. So we're going to switch back to Teddy Roosevelt just for a second. So you can see here on this little readout, level 1, that's the 12-year period. Now you'll notice all these other little periods here too. So when I'm talking about these 12-year, 15-year, 8-year, 20-year periods, I'm talking about the L1 periods, level 1. But there's actually many sublevels underneath that. At each major period, each L1 period is broken up into L2 periods, and every L2 period is 1/12 of the length of the major period that it precedes. So the first L2 period within his Pisces period was a 12-month period instead of a 12-year period, a 15-month period instead of a 15-year period, an 8-month period instead of an 8-year period, a 20-month period instead of a 20-year period, and so on. So it's like a fractal pattern. The pattern of these planetary periods are just divided by 12 in order to create these little subperiods. And so these kind of tell you the ups and downs within each period, right? Because your life isn't static. It goes up and down and sideways. So this technique can kind of sometimes give you a good indication of what the high points are within a given major period. So that's what makes this next bit kind of useful. Important subperiods within a given major period include when someone encounters the ruler of the major period on subperiods. For example, if someone's in a Taurus major period and they were born with Venus and Leo, then when they encounter the ruler of the major period, they encounter the ruler of the major period, but they encounter Leo as a subperiod because it contains Venus. So one kind of interesting example of this is Mitt Romney in his 2012 election loss. He was in a Capricorn period starting in 2001. So that was his L1. That's the L1 major period he was in, and he is still in. And the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, which he has in Leo. So we would say, well, he's going to encounter the most significant point of this period for him is going to be when he encounters the sign of Leo. So you notice that when he got to the subperiod of Leo, August 27th, 2012, that was actually the day that he was officially nominated to be the GOP candidate in the 2012 election. So that's sometimes the timing isn't always that dramatic, but sometimes it is. And so Leo contains Saturn, the ruler of the period. So this showed that this is going to be the kind of key moment. And of course, Saturn, isn't always a very fun experience. And he, ultimately he lost. That's a very painful thing that he probably had to go through. And Saturn, Saturn's a bummer. With Nelson Mandela, When he was released from prison, he was under a Cancer subperiod within a Sagittarius major period. And what's kind of interesting about that is um, Sagittarius, of course, is ruled by Jupiter. And where does he have Jupiter? He has it in Cancer. So within his Sagittarius major period, the 12-year period, he would encounter the full weight, in some sense, of that period when he encountered the ruler of the period. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius and it's in Cancer. So when he reached Cancer, that's when he was let go from prison. And that's pretty like Jupiterian, right? So loosing of the ties that bind. So now we have angular periods from fortune. So oftentimes people are more visible or more active in their careers when they reach signs angular from fortune. And special attention is paid to when the sign 10th from fortune is encountered, especially in eminent charts and when multiple factors are at play simultaneously. So this is Tony Blair, and he was born with a lot of fortune in Pisces and spirit in Virgo. And so the 10th sign from fortune is Sagittarius. And when he reached Sagittarius, that was pretty much like right before he was elected prime minister. And it really wasn't that like when what am I trying to say here? Yes, when he ended that Sagittarius period, like before that Sagittarius period ended, he decided to resign as prime minister. So he basically stayed prime minister just for the duration of this 12-year period, just for the duration of the Sagittarius period. And as soon as it was over, like, he kind of closed up shop, and now he's, Capricorn. So obscure and, kind of trying to stay out of trouble. Like, so his most visible prominent period was perfectly timed out by the length of time of the Sagittarius period. Then we have Mr. Pigface Fucker here. So he has, let's see, fortune in Sagittarius, and he has a lot of spirit in Cancer. So because he was born with a lot of fortune in Sagittarius, that makes the 10th sign from fortune Virgo. So we'd expect to say, well, when he reaches Virgo, that's going to be a time when he's really prominent. And yeah, he was elected in May of 2010. So he entered that Virgo period. Like 3 months before he was actually elected prime minister. Now, what's interesting to note about this is, some people have asked me, what role do the outers have, in Zodiacal Releasing? And I think this is kind of an interesting example because, David Cameron was the prime minister, and he was born with Uranus and Pluto in Virgo, and so he had, this really prominent Virgo period, but it contained Uranus and Pluto natally, and we're in the midst of, this Uranus-Pluto square, and, he makes this terrible gamble about, putting the relationship between the UK and the EU in jeopardy by calling this referendum, and, it doesn't go in his favor. Now, of course, we can sort of see this by Saturn opposing the sign. We sort of tend to guess this is like probably not good. There's probably some really big surprises to come out of this that aren't necessarily very good. And this obviously is easy to say in retrospect. I wasn't really thinking at the time along these lines, but yeah, it sort of appears more obvious now. Like Uranus and Pluto in the sign that in his major period sign. Like, yeah, I can imagine something like Brexit might possibly happen with this subnatal arrangement. Then we have Justin Trudeau. He's the Canadian Prime Minister. And so he was born with a lot of fortune in Taurus, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Jupiter. Now, what's interesting here is that he has a lot of fortune in Taurus with Venus in Aquarius, the 10th sign from fortune. So this is one of those, eminent positions. This is someone we can say, oh, like this person has a, potential to have this, great um, capacity to be Venus like in some sense. And he also has an additional eminence factor, which is that he has a lot of spirit ruled by Jupiter in its own sign of Sagittarius. So he has a couple of eminence factors working out here for him. He spent the first 12 years in Sagittarius, the next 27 in Capricorn, and then he reaches Aquarius, which is the 10th sign from the Lot of Fortune, which also contains the lot, the Lord of the Lot of Fortune, Venus. And so what's interesting is he entered that in June 4th, 2010. It was not long after that that he was elected as the leader of the opposition and eventually elected prime minister himself. One thing that's kind of interesting is that he, you know, uh, is very charming. He's very popular on social media. He's young. He's very handsome. There's that picture of that guy looking at his butt and everyone looking at his butt. This is Venus. This is totally Venus. Everyone like loves this guy. Sort of beloved. Across the world. This charming Canadian prime minister, and he has Venus in the Fortune 10th, and it's currently active. As he's in this Aquarius period. So just to kind of give you an idea of how some of these placements can work out sometimes. Oh, God, this fucker. So, all right. So he was born with a lot of fortune in Cancer, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Aquarius. And the 10th sign from fortune is Aries. And, of course, when he reached the 10th sign from fortune, Aries, that was on September 13th, 1930. That was pretty much when the Nazis took over. That was right at an election where the Nazis gained like over 100 seats in German parliament at the time, and that was really the beginning of Hitler rising to power and assuming power and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the war happened in that time. This is his biggest moment, most visible moment. Then we have Nelson Mandela. He was born with the lot of fortune in Aries and the lot of spirit in Leo. So he spent the first 19 years in Leo, the next 20 in Virgo, the next 8 in Libra, the next 15 in Scorpio, the next 12 in Sagittarius, and finally, as an older man, he reaches the 10th sign from Fortune, Capricorn. And that was on June 25th, 1991. And he was elected the president of South Africa after he entered his F10 Capricorn period. So it took a long time, but god dang, he got there. And this technique kind of shows that, I think, very clearly. It wasn't at any other time that he rose to that level of power and prominence. It was then, towards the end of his life. So Martin Luther King, he was born with the lot of fortune in Gemini, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Aquarius. The 10th sign from fortune is Pisces, and so he spent the first 30 years of his life in Aquarius, and then right after the first 30-year period, he entered his 10th whole sign house. Now, his fortune 10th. And so what's interesting about this is it contains the moon and Venus in Pisces. And what was Martin Luther King motivated to do in this part of his life? This is the period from August 11th, 1958 to June 9th, 1970. Obviously, he didn't survive this period. But, I mean, this is when he, became a household name. This is him leading the civil rights movement. This is Dr. King at the height of his powers. And what I think is interesting about this as well is it's not just the sign, it's not just the planets in the sign that kind of show his motivations. Obviously, his motivations were for peace and for nonviolence. And I think that's pretty perfectly summed up by the moon and Venus in Pisces. Pisces in its exalted sign. So This is definitely a guy who was trying to preach like peace and unity and nonviolence and reconciliation. It's almost beautiful. That this is like the signature of the civil rights movement in a sense, in a brief astrological snapshot. Um, what I think is kind of interesting about this too, though, is the fact that occasionally contributing circumstances are the planets which are casting aspects into the signs. So notice that Mars and Saturn are both angular to Pisces. So, his agenda in this time might have been, really, really good and awesome, but, it was squared by Mars and Saturn. He was bitterly opposed by, bigotry and the forces of hatred and division and so forth. So sometimes multiple factors are at play. So you may be simultaneously encountering the Lord of the Lot, the Lord of the Period, and an angular period from fortune. And this kind of gives you a greater sense of, oh my gosh, like, this is really going to happen. There's more confirmation the native will be rising to prominence or doing the most important or most known work. So, for example, in the chart of George W. Bush, he was born with a lot of fortune in Scorpio and a lot of spirit in Taurus. So when he reached that Leo period that he became president under, not only was it the 10th sign from fortune, but it was also hitting the Lord of the lot of spirit, Leo. So it was like a double whammy. It was the Lord of the lot, and it was the 10th sign from fortune. With this guy, with Paul Ryan, he was elected Speaker of the House under Libra Aquarius. So he was born with the lot of fortune in Pisces, and he was born with a lot of spirit in Leo. So when he reached the Libra major period, rather, oh yeah, that's right. When he reached the Libra major period, Libra is ruled by a Venus. So when he reached Aquarius as a sub period, because his sun is conjunct the Venus, because his sun is conjunct Venus, he was also hitting the Lord of the lot of spirit. So he was hitting the Lord of the major period and the Lord of the lot, and that was when he was elected Speaker of the House. So these like two factors kind of came together to kind of provide a an upgrade, amongst his peers. Here's a non-politician example. Um, so Pamela Anderson was born with the lot of fortune in Virgo and lot of spirit in Aries. So what that means is that the lot of, the 10th sign from fortune would be Gemini. So we know that when spirit reaches Gemini, this is probably going to be a really prominent period for her. So sure enough, first 15 years Aries, next 8 of Taurus, and then finally she hits Gemini. And in the subperiods, we would know that Cancer would be the really important period because Mercury is in Cancer. Mercury is ruled by the major period, Gemini. So it was under Gemini Cancer that she first appeared in Baywatch. So, yeah, we have two factors at play here. One, she's in a fortune 10th major period, right, in Gemini. And then the sub period contains the ruler of the major period, Mercury. So it was like, double whammy. And this is when she became, most famous, is this, bubbly, beautiful cheerleader. No, cheerleader. Lifeguard. Oh my god. There's a picture right there too. Wow. Alrighty. So now there's another curious phenomenon about Zodiacal Releasing, which is the loosing of the bond. Under certain periods, under certain major periods, the subperiods will exhaust all the signs of the zodiac, and when that happens, instead of going back to the original sign of the major period, it'll flip to the opposite sign. And this is totally random and it's totally weird, but you totally have to do it. So yeah, when the subperiods have exhausted all the signs of the zodiac within a major period, the subperiod will flip to the opposing sign instead of returning to the sign of the major period. And it often represents turning points, magnified repetitions, and reversals in circumstances. And I don't think it's been perfectly figured out yet exactly which one's which. It really, I mean, almost depends on the person from person to person. I guess there might be some general things. Well, let's see. Okay, so Marine Le Pen has kind of an interesting loosening of the bond story. Oh yeah. So basically, I would like to draw attention to her moon and her Mars. She has moon in Capricorn, which isn't the best place to have the moon. So the lunar issues are not necessarily always best supported here. And it's ruled, so rather, it rules the 10th. So we could almost say that like her ambitions or her reputation in a sense come from her moon in the fourth, where she comes from, her family. And she is the daughter of a famous politician. Now, at the same time, she was born with Mars in Cancer. So this is still technically her 10th house. Even though it's at the very end of the sign. And of course, Mars in Cancer is really not a great sign to have your Mars in. And this is a day chart as well. So this all seems to add up to someone whose reputation is supported by their family, but also is hurt by their family. And so Marine Le Pen, if you don't know, she is the daughter of an extremely far-right French political figure, Jean-Marie Le Pen. So literally her reputation, yes, it has come from the family that she comes from, but it's also hurt by the family that she comes from because she's had to, she's basically almost a lot of her political life, she's had to kind of fight back against the notion that she necessarily represents all of the ugly things that her father believed in, like, denying the Holocaust and so forth. So when she entered, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so when she entered that Cancer major period in 1996, this is when she won her first election on March 15th, 1998. So really just 4 days, no, sorry. Within that first subperiod. So in the first subperiod, the first Cancer subperiod of the Cancer major period, she won her first election. She had joined her father's party. Now, under Cancer Capricorn, now remember this is important because Capricorn contains her moon, which is the ruler of the period. She begins managing her father's 2007 campaign, and she does that partly by bringing attention to herself. She released a book almost on that day that tries to humanize her father, sort of like Ivanka Trump in some ways, and that is the foreshadowing for the loosening of the bond that would occur later. See how the sequence of signs goes through all the signs of the zodiac, but then it flips. Instead of Gemini going to Cancer, because we've gone through all of the signs of the zodiac, it flips to Capricorn. So July 10th, 2013, that's when things turn on their head. That's when things kind of, the perspective, reverses. And so it was after that Capricorn loosening of the bond that she expelled her father from his own political party. So the oftentimes the loosing of the bond shows you a progression of a theme in someone's life. It's usually, described by the way the planets are arranged in their chart. So um, with this signature, this potential for having problems in your reputation because of your family, but also having a reputation come from your family, she, you know, she gets a political office under Cancer because of her familial connections. She helps her own father under Cancer Capricorn for his doomed campaign. And then at the loosing of the bond, she is now in charge of the party. And now she is kicking her father out of the party because he, made some comments about the Holocaust not having happened. Seriously, what the fuck is wrong with these people? But anyway, yeah, so not that it makes her views any that much better, but yeah, apparently she's not, she's not beneath that. So she kicked her and dad out of his own political party, and I think this shows a pretty good reversal, right? I mean, she went from being, under him, being the daughter to the father, to being the head. I mean, that often happens with the loosings of the bond. Like, the apprentice becomes the master, the student becomes the teacher, um, the the leader becomes the spectator. It sort of shows these ways in which things revolve around and kind of turn, on its head. And so I think that's a pretty interesting example of a loosening of the bond um, thing. So with this guy, Bill Clinton, he has a fairly obvious loosening of the bond story. So when he entered, pardon me, when he entered uh, Aquarius on Spirit, that was in 1973, and that was when he made his first run for Congress. And when he reached Aquarius Leo, now remember, Aquarius Leo is going to be important because his Saturn is in Leo. Saturn rules Aquarius, and it's in Leo. So when he reached Aquarius Leo, that is when he made his comeback election. He was thrown out of office in 1980, and then came back, roaring back in 1982, and he was called the Comeback Kid as a result of that. And then he did the same thing, basically at the loosing of the bond. Um, he had lost the first um, caucus competition, and then he came second in the New Hampshire primary. It was so unexpected that he was called the Comeback Kid again, um, under the Leo loosing of the bond, and that was kind of what set him on the path to becoming getting elected in 1992. And then when he reached the Aquarius period, the final Aquarius period, the so-called completion period, that was when he left office. So it was a reflection of the beginning of his whole career, starting back in 1973, running for his first office. So it kind of, that Aquarius period kind of neatly captures his, you know, uh, his career actually being in an office. Now with Paul Ryan, he has an interesting loosening of the bond story. So he was in a Libra major period and a Capricorn subperiod. So he has Mercury in Capricorn, and it's squared by Mars, and it's also squared by Uranus, and the Moon is squaring as well, which isn't too bad. But I think Mercury square Uranus and opposing Mars. This seems to be somewhat volatile time. And on the night of the election, of the 2012 election, when he was a VP candidate, um, there was a loosening the bond from Sagittarius to Cancer, right? Because Sagittarius would normally go to Capricorn, but because it already had cycled through all of the subperiods for Capricorn. When it finally got to Capricorn again, it jumped to Cancer. And so that was on the night of the 2012 election. And that put Mars in superior position to Cancer. And yeah, I mean, yeah, he lost. So it's sort of a fairly interesting example of a loosening the bond. And this one really kills me because it's the one thing I definitely overlooked in my 2016 election predictions. Because I had, I guess I misinterpreted it a little bit. But you can see what I was seeing. He was born with fortune in Cancer and lot of spirit in Capricorn. And the 10th sign from fortune is Aries, and he has this ascendant in Aries, which is all with a very prominent and very uh, eminent looking, Mars in Capricorn in the 10th. And he entered a cadent Pisces period, starting on the very day that he endorsed Hillary, which was weird because uh, that was before Hillary had even announced herself. He took it upon himself to endorse her for president in the 2016 election, and it's just kind of weird because he ended up getting selected as her vice presidential candidate. And he, I, I didn't know how to view the cadent period. I mean, if I were going strictly by the book, a cadent period would indicate a kind of a slackened time for action. I mean, it wouldn't be something I would expect for someone to win under. But I figured, well, he's a vice president. He would be a vice president, so he wouldn't actually be in charge necessarily. That turned out to be a bad call. In 2016, under the 2016 election, he was in a Taurus subperiod, and then on the third level down, he was in a Cancer L3 period, and then he was just about to hit an L4 period, loosening of the bond to Capricorn, the ruler, the where his Mars is. And so when I saw this, I thought, well, maybe it just shows like he is having a victory or something because he's Mars in Capricorn. But really, it was about he had a loss because Mars, even if it's in Capricorn, doesn't always work in your favor. Plus, it's a day chart, so I just feel bad that I kind of missed that because there's one clue that, in some ways, is very similar to the story of Paul Ryan's 2012 loss. So, kind of annoying that I missed that, but nevertheless, an interesting loosening of the bond example. Now, with George Washington, I admit that I did a little tiny bit of rectification on this chart. It says he was born around 10 a.m., but it only says he was born around 10 a.m. So just a couple minutes before 10 a.m., his lot of fortune is in Pisces, and that seems to make all the difference in his releasing. So I think he was born with a lot of fortune in Pisces and a lot of spirit in Cancer. And that means that when he was elected president, the first president of the United States, that would have been under a Virgo major period. So number one, that's an angular period. And then Gemini, also an angular period. And then under that Gemini period would be a loosening of the bond to Sagittarius, the fortune 10th. And that happened on January 11th, 1789. And that was when the that was when the election basically ended. Elections weren't just held on one night like they are now. They were kind of well, I guess they're not really held on one night anymore now anyway, with early voting and absentee ballots and stuff like that. But that was when his loosening of the bond to his fortune 10th was, that coincided with his election to be the first president of the United States. So I think that's sort of interesting that this technique can work on a chart like from this far back. And then Another interesting example of a loosening of the bond is with Barack Obama's chart and the assassination of Osama bin Laden. So Obama was in his Aquarius period with Jupiter, right? And he was on a Virgo subperiod, August 18th, 2010. So this is basically before the midterm elections of 2010, and where the Democratic Party received a shellacking. And so yeah, it didn't look very good because he has Mars there. But Mars is also, the planet of war and stuff, and he has Jupiter here, and so he basically has Jupiter amplified on the rather he has Jupiter in his major period level, and then Mars and Pluto on his uh, sub level, and it was right around the loosening of the bond to Leo. Right after that he ordered the strike on Osama bin Laden, and that was under Aquarius Virgo, the loosed Virgo, which highlighted both Mars and Jupiter, while Mars and Jupiter were conjunct in the sky that night. And so, of course, what happened was essentially a military victory, which is, yeah, a pretty apt description of Mars and Jupiter. And the guy who actually shot Osama bin Laden in the head was born with the sun at the same degree that Mars and Jupiter were at on that night. So you had the commander with this big Mars Jupiter activation in his chart, and the guy who shot Osama bin Laden, with this big Mars Jupiter transit. So, interesting. Oh yeah, then we have Neil Armstrong. So he's the first person to land or to walk on a foreign object that isn't Earth. So he's kind of a big deal. And we can kind of see that from the fact that he was born with a lot of fortune in Capricorn with Saturn in Capricorn. So big eminence factor there. And so releasing from the lot of spirit, he has 8 years in Libra, 15 years in Scorpio, 12 years in Sagittarius, and then 27 years in Capricorn. And so this is when things really start happening for him. He is a pilot. He's part of a very elite group that is being considered for these lunar missions in the space race, and he gets to this Aquarius subperiod, and it's at the loosening of the bond. Pardon me. It's the loosening of the bond from Aquarius from Capricorn to Leo that he lands on the moon. Well, he lands on the moon under the Capricorn subperiod, the L4 period, and then comes back to Earth at the loosening of the bond. So it's angular to fortune, hitting the ruler of fortune, Saturn and Capricorn, leading up to loosening the bond to Leo and return to the Earth. And what I think is especially interesting about this is that the sequence basically plays out for when he first landed on the moon: Capricorn, Aquarius, loosed Aquarius, Capricorn. So we're seeing a reflection, right? It's it reads the same forward as it does backwards. And when he got to the moon, he said that they'd spend all this time trying to get to the moon, and the first thing they did when they got there was just look back at the Earth. I mean, all of these trips to the moon have made people reflect back on the planet, which is funny just because the moon itself is supposed to be the place of passive principles, of reflection, of introspection. Has made us care more about our world, our home, our Earth. And what I think is especially interesting about this for Neil Armstrong is the fact that he has his midheaven in the 9th house. In whole sign houses, the midheaven doesn't always fall in the 10th. It sometimes falls in the 11th, and sometimes fall in the 9th. So it just means that the 9th house can adopt topics which are relevant for the 10th as well as the 9th. And so the 9th, of course, rules travels. long distance travels, and this is certainly a long distance travel. Uh, and the loosening of the bond, when he returned to Earth, that's he has a sun in Leo, in the on the IC. So it was like, he went where no one had been before with his midheaven in the ninth. While he's releasing in Aquarius, and then loosening the bond back to the IC, literally coming back to Earth as a hero, with the sun in Leo. Um, it's I think that's sort of an interesting kind of description of what happened to him. Now, I wouldn't necessarily see this and think, "Oh, this guy's going to walk on the moon today," but I can kind of see how what happened sort of fits what happened with his Zodiacal Releasing. That he went on a big trip and then came back a hero, and that happened under the unfolding of this technique. So we've talked a lot about Zodiacal Releasing from the lot of Spirit. Now, what about the lot of Fortune? So it's used to investigate matters from the body, and despite this distinction, occasional subtle interplay between Fortune and Spirit kind of happens. It's supposed to be what is within the realm of one's chances, but sometimes choice sort of is involved, and um, I think that since fortune is supposed to concern like one's body, I think if your career really involves your body, like if you're an athlete, then maybe fortune might be a better lot to look at than spirit. Um, it just kind of depends. But I have a few examples, not a ton, but just a few that kind of show the how this technique can work. Um, so Martin Luther King was killed on April 4th, 1968. Now, what's interesting is that Vitus Valens, the originator of this technique, he singles out the eighth sign from fortune, as a killing house. Now, he doesn't do that within the context of Zodiacal Releasing, but I think this is such an evocative way to describe the eighth sign from fortune that, I kind of wondered if the eighth sign from fortune had anything really to say about, death in a chart. And so we see that he was born with fortune in Gemini, and he has in Capricorn is the eighth sign from fortune. So releasing from fortune, he had 20 years of Gemini, and then he had 25 years of Cancer. And when he got to the loosing of the bond on January 31st, 1966, that was the loosing of the bond to his fortune eighth. And it was within that sub period that he was assassinated. So it was the killing place for Martin Luther King. And then with Princess Diana, she had a very similar setup. She has fortune in Leo, which makes her fortune eighth Pisces. So she spent the first 19 years of her life in Leo for fortune, and then she spent the next 20 for Virgo. But of course, Virgo makes a loosing of the bond 17 years in, and so that happened. The loosing of the bond to Pisces happened on July 22nd, 1997, and she died on August 31st, 1997. So not long after a loosing of the bond to Pisces in her fortune eighth, which is opposed by Mars and Pluto, she died in a crash. So it's kind of scary that that happens, especially since I have one kind of similar to this. Not exactly similar to this, but I'm kind of all freaked out, Oh yeah, so this is one's kind of fun. So this is Claudia Marie. She is a porn star, and this is actually her before breast implants. Um, she was born with the lot of fortune Leo, so she spent the first 19 years in Leo for fortune, and then the next 20 in Virgo. And what's kind of interesting is that 17 years into this Virgo period, there was going to be a loosing of the bond. And that loosing of the bond happened to Jupiter. And that loosing of the bond happened on September 7th, 2010. And that was literally 3 days before she got breast implants. Huge ones. And of course, Jupiter is in the sign that she released to. Now, what's interesting about this is actually exactly the same as Princess Diana's um, chart, right? Because the loosing of the bond occurred to the fortune eighth with Mars and Virgo even opposing, but you can see how differently it turned out, right? Because Mars and Pluto were in Virgo and nothing was in Pisces. Whereas in this case, Mars is in Virgo, but Jupiter is in the eighth. And it wasn't like she wasn't in danger. I mean, she did go under a knife and had, giant silicone bags placed, in her body. So this is like her body was vulnerable at this time, but she was ultimately fine and, got bigger, and that's sort of symbolized, I guess, by Jupiter being in the sign of the fortune eighth. Um, but yeah. And then on the opposite end of the breast scale, we have Angelina Jolie, and she has a interesting situation here with her moon. We can see her moon is close to the midheaven. It's in Aries. It's close to a conjunction with Mars, and its next aspect is technically a square to Saturn. It doesn't hit Jupiter until it first hits a square to Saturn. So when the moon or any other planet is separating from one malefic and applying to another one, that's called that's it's like a containment by the malefics. And so it means that the moon can even act like a malefic itself. Um, and the fact that the moon is closing in on a square with Saturn seems to tell us, like, yikes, especially when Cancer and Capricorn become, sublords, because this is kind of telling us, something kind of not nice is happening here with the moon and Saturn in Cancer. So let's see. She entered a Cancer major period on January 8th, 2003, and she hit a Capricorn sub period in 2011. And it was within that sub period that she found out that she had a gene which made her very susceptible to breast cancer. All of the female relatives that she had in her side of the family had died from breast cancer, and so out of a great fear of death, of what had happened to the women in her family, she decided to undergo a voluntary double mastectomy. And so, yeah, that's pretty Moon Saturn like, and this is happening, while the moon and Saturn are highlighted as the rulers, and they're in this relationship to each other, and so we have all of the associated themes of moon and Saturn, fear of breast cancer, fear of death, it's almost kind of literal. And yeah, so there's that. So I think I just, since there's a lot to take in, but I wanted to kind of fill you in on some upcoming Zodiacal releasing events, which I think are kind of interesting. And it kind of shows you how you can use this technique to make certain projections about people. Um, for example, with Mitt Romney, uh, when he entered that Capricorn period back in 2001, that was right before he was elected governor. And in fact, he was elected governor under the losing of the bond to Cancer within that first Capricorn subperiod in 2001. So when he entered the Cancer subperiod in 2010, that was when he was in the middle of that Republican primary for the 2012 election. That was the one that was actually successful in, that he actually became the GOP, candidate. So what's interesting is that he is going to have a loosening of the bond starting September 25th, 2018. And this loosening of the bond is foreshadowed by the events of the previous one from August 8th, 2010 to August 27th, 2012, which suggests that, he potentially comes back into some sort of political activity in that time. And there has been a rumor that he will run to be a Utah senator, which actually would be a bigger deal than you'd think it is, because the Mormons are very anti-Trump, and Romney, probably more than any of the Republican candidates in the last cycle, were more critical of Trump. So, I mean, it probably wouldn't be good news for Trump if Romney decides to run for the Senate, because Romney would have kind of an outsized voice and influence in the Senate as a previous presidential candidate, and as someone representing a state that is, although it's conservative, is also very distrustful of Trump. I mean, he could be like a Republican Ted Kennedy almost to Trump's Reagan or something. Kind of become a big problem for him to kind of keep him, on track, I guess. But yeah, I think that this loosening of the bond shows that he will be returning to public life in some way that will be fairly similar in some way to his ascent to the Massachusetts governor's office, as well as to being the GOP torchbearer. One interesting thing about Tim Kaine's chart is, I mean, and this is really weird just because Tim Kaine doesn't seem to be that, like, I mean, he's sort of a boring candidate, right? I mean, we sort of live in more exciting and revolutionary times right now, and Tim Kaine is kind of this just sort of more regular old, center left, sort of blue dog Democrat type. And but what Zodiacal Releasing indicates is that he will be coming up to a major Fortune 10th period starting in 2026. So it looks like he has more to offer. And it's kind of weird because he's already been a governor, a senator, he's been head of the DNC, he's been a VP candidate. So, I mean, what else is next? Like, it just seems kind of weird. He would be old, but he would be about as old as the candidates in the previous cycle. So it's not impossible to think that he might like run for something, but what this technique indicates is that he hasn't actually come to the peak of his prominence yet. So somehow we'll be seeing Tim Kaine, I guess. Uh, Paul Ryan has a few things which are a little concerning, depending how you look at it. So he was elected speaker under that Libra Aquarius period, the Libra major period and the Aquarius subperiod. And he will encounter the Aquarius subperiod again on November 2nd, 2020, which is just like a day or so before the 2020 election. So, I mean, if he won, if he became speaker under the previous Aquarius period, which is Lord of the Lot of Spirit, and he comes up to this again, I mean, I'd say that if he is in an election in the 2020 election, that he probably would win. I don't know what office he would be seeking necessarily. I'm yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not saying that he's going to run for president or something. I'm just saying that he looks to be repeating, what happened before, and what happened before was, on balance, good for him. So we will see for 2020 and Paul Ryan. Okay, and this guy. So the reason I left this chart for the end is because I wanted to show you everything that I've kind of seen so far with political leaders and the times that they become prominent, the times that they become president, that they're often coinciding with periods which are angular to fortune, or periods which contain the Lord of the major period, or the Lord of the lots. So there's kind of a thread here, right? So when I take a look at this guy's chart, and he has fortune in Aquarius and spirit in Pisces, and he was in a Cancer period, that's cadent to fortune. So that's why I thought, well, he's not hitting like a Lord of the Lot of. He's not hitting the Lord of the Lot of Spirit. He's not hitting a Lord of the Major Period. He's not hitting an angle to fortune. So I'm a little confused. Like I wasn't really able to explain why he won, and I didn't predict it that way. On this basis, because I figured that just he didn't seem to have the releasings that indicated a win, but he has, and I don't really know what to make of that because on some level, his releasings make sense as far as timing out kind of the phases in his life. Um, for example, the cancer period that he's currently in really was the beginning of his the new persona of Trump as a reality TV show host. So I guess his career in politics is kind of an outgrowth of that. So some people have suggested to me that it was more of a lateral transfer, which is somewhat typical of a cadent period. Like he was already famous, so a cadent period wouldn't make him more obscure. A cadent period would just put him in a different line of work, which is true with the reality show stuff. But I didn't necessarily see the shift to politics, and certainly not one that I would have expected. And so, for anyone who's just said that, like, oh well, Patrick Watts is just biased, and that's why, he didn't predict correctly. I just hope you would take this into consideration that, like, I did have reasons why that, are plausible why I wouldn't have thought Trump would win based on his releasings. But if this technique is to be used and can be used with his chart, then we have to wonder what that Capricorn loosening the bond is all about on December 28th, 2017. And my friend and colleague Curtis Manwaring has done fantastic work on this topic. Pardon me, you should look him up and read some of his articles on this if you haven't already. But he basically discovered a bit of a pattern with the Capricorn periods and releasings, which indicate that he seems to undergo financial troubles at the times of Capricorn periods and activity on his releasings involving Capricorn. So, for example, his first bankruptcy happened under Gemini Capricorn in 1991. And this is also when Saturn was in Capricorn. Saturn is coming back to Capricorn, right around December 28th, 2017. So having a return of Saturn while he's coming to a return of this Capricorn period where he's previously had financial troubles. The foreshadowing period in 2008, that was when Trump Entertainment Resorts missed a payment of $53.1 million to bondholders, which triggered a Chapter 11 inquiry under Cancer, Capricorn, Cancer. And from this, I think we could say, well, if he has financial troubles as a businessman, this is what happens. If he has financial troubles as a president, that I guess it would apply to the country. And so that makes one think of potential financial crises or a bankruptcy for the country of some sort. Something fairly dramatic because it's a huge losing of the bond event. But that's kind of what we see coming up for Trump. There's a fairly long period from December 28th, 2017 to March 17th, 2020 that he is in this kind of not positive looking period, and that is correlated with previous times of financial calamity for Trump. There are other lots aside from the Lot of Fortune and Spirit, which you can release from. Pardon me. Not a whole lot of research has been done on these yet, except for a lot of arrows by Chris Brennan. And it does seem to work. There's a bit of a debate about whether you should reverse the calculations for these lots or not for day and night. And I'm of the opinion that you absolutely should, because it's not... the calculations for the lots are not algebraic. They're done with according to their esoteric meanings. So some people have made the argument that if you calculate them with the night calculation, that you're technically doubling the algebraic formula, but they're not algebraic. But Anyway, that's just my opinion. I think that you should reverse the lots for day and night for Hermetic Lots. And thank you for watching. This has been really long, and I didn't realize it's going to be so hard on my voice. But yeah, there's my email, patrickwatsonAstrologer@gmail.com, and my website where I post blogs sometimes and videos as much as I can, weekly-ish at bigfatastro.com. You can contact me at pwatsonastro on Twitter. Also, make sure you add me on Facebook, www.facebook.com/bigfatastro. And also watch my videos on YouTube, as you probably already are. But if you haven't or you don't know about them, I'm Big Fat Astro Vlog on YouTube. And that is a link to a piece of freeware, but I would really recommend you buy Delphic Oracle. So search Delphic Oracle, and you'll get the full Hellenistic program that has all the bells and whistles. And I'd also highly recommend for more background on this technique and other examples to consider buying Hellenistic Astrology, the Study of Fate and Fortune by Chris Brennan. And you can also look up the original translations of, rather, the translations of the original work by Vedius Valens, where he explains this, which is book 4. So Google Vedius Valens book 4 to kind of read the original instructions for how to do this and how to interpret it and so forth. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and hopefully you know a little bit more about Zodiacal Releasing from Lot of Fortune and Spirit. Thank you.